better to light one candle than curse the darkness.
This is full-time Catholic radio for Southeast Michigan, 990 WDEO, Ypsilanti, Detroit, or on the internet at WDEO.net.
With the New York Times in one hand and the Catechism of the Catholic Church in the other, Al Kresta is ready for conversations of consequence.
The Smoker's Quiet, we now have a new pope.
Habemus Papam. It is Jorge Mario Bergoglio.
He's a Jesuit, and he had taken the name Francis.
You have chosen wisely.
He spent all his life being close to people, especially the poor.
Then when he began to speak,
Buonasera.
He won me over and won the whole crowd over.
You had me at hello.
Broadcasting from the studios of Ave Maria Radio in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and taking a closer Catholic look at current events, issues, and ideas. This is Kresta in the Afternoon.
I thought Bergoglio was like a recipe or something.
He was very well known for his love for the poor.
He kind of looked at himself and shrugged and said, now what have I got myself into?
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
This is a very exciting moment for the Universal Church.
And good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta. Thanks for coming back with me. We've got a wonderful guest coming up, Dr. Stephen Meyer. He years ago wrote a book called Signature of the Cell, an outstanding book on the origin of life. And now he's taken on another topic related, Darwin's doubt, the explosive origin of animal life and the case for intelligent design. When Darwin finished Origin of Species, published in 1859, he thought he had explained every clue but one. And this is what is commonly called the Cambrian Explosion. This is the rapid appearance of animal life 530 million years ago, where you see the major phyla, 23 or so of the major phyla, animal phyla, are present in the fossil record without any apparent common ancestor. Now, in Origin of Species, Darwin was honest enough to acknowledge that this is a problem. You have fossil records that document a sudden appearance of life. They do so in a remote period of geological history, but there's no evidence of simpler life forms in the earlier rocks. These things just show up. And if the theory of natural selection, he thought, if that was to stand, how could this gap in the evolutionary chain be explained? And there's been a lot of work done on this over time, but the mystery remains. And this is one major area that there hasn't been a great deal of progress on. So we're going to take time with Stephen Meyer. He has a doctorate in philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge. He's a widely respected intelligent design advocate. And we're going to take a look at Darwin's doubt, the explosive origin of animal life and the case for intelligent design. We're living in a very fascinating time because there are a lot of elite philosophers and scientists who are questioning the traditionalist view of Darwinian evolution, the so-called neo-Darwinian synthesis, which has been with us since the 1940s or so. So we're going to take a look at this with Dr. Meyer, but first, let's hit the headlines.
Thank you, Al. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Monday, July 15th. The saint of the day is St. Bonaventure. Attorney General Eric Holder confirms the Justice Department is considering possible federal charges against George Zimmerman.
We must not, as we have too often in the past, let this opportunity pass.
A Florida jury acquitted Zimmerman Saturday in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin last year. Holder called the shooting tragic and unnecessary and said that justice must be done. He also remarked that the U.S. should not shy away from emotionally charged issues. The Reverend Al Sharpton is organizing a Justice for Trayvon National Day of Action. Sharpton says demonstrations will take place in more than 100 cities across the nation this Saturday. Meantime, protests are planned for today with marches in Los Angeles, Atlanta, and other cities. Hollywood is shaken by the sudden passing of Corey Monteith, the actor who starred as Finn Hudson on the hit Fox television show Glee.
The coroner will be determining next steps with respect to establishing cause of death, but all indications are that there was no foul play.
Vancouver's acting police chief Doug Lepard says Monteith was found dead in a Vancouver, British Columbia hotel Saturday. Monteith, a native of Calgary, had been open about his past troubles with drug and alcohol abuse. He checked himself into rehab back in April. He was 31 years old. A 6-year-old boy remains in an Illinois hospital after being buried 11 feet deep in a sand dune. Rescue workers toiled for hours on Friday to free Nathan Wosner from the shifting sands at Mount Baldy Beach. Wosner's grandfather told reporters today that when the boy was pulled from the sand, he feared that Nathan was dead. Doctors at the University of Chicago Hospital say the boy's brain function is normal and he's responding to treatment. Texas Governor Rick Perry is supporting a controversial measure that would shut down most Texan abortion clinics and ban the procedure after 20 weeks of pregnancy. The bill passed the legislature Friday and is waiting on Perry's signature to become law. President Obama is honoring former President George H.W. Bush for his successful Points of Light volunteer program. In a White House ceremony, Obama said the spirit of service is vital to America's national character.
And today we can say that our country is a better and a stronger force for good in the world because, more and more, we are a people that serve.
The White House called Points of Light the world's largest organization dedicated to volunteer services. The ceremony also marked the 5,000th Point of Light Award for meritorious volunteer service. An Iowa couple received the award for their work in fighting hunger. The White House supports filibuster reform in the Senate.
Gridlock is something we've seen in Washington for some time, but the Republicans in the Senate have brought gridlock to new heights or new lows, depending on how you look at it.
That's presidential spokesman Jay Carney, who called the Republican filibusters obstructionism and said they have reached a ridiculous level. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is threatening to change Senate rules to require only a 51-vote majority for executive branch nominations. Republicans, well, they call it a nuclear option and warn that the tables will turn at the next time the GOP is in the majority in the Senate. Twinkies are finally back on store shelves everywhere today. Walmart jumped the gun a bit with weekend sales of the beloved yellow snack cake in thousands of markets. Twinkies disappeared from stores last November after Hostess Brands declared bankruptcy. What's considered by many to be the world's most expensive car is being restored in Santa Cruz County, California. The rare 1921 Duesenberg is estimated to be worth $50 million. It's the first Duesenberg ever built and has been owned by the same family since it was brand new. It will be on display at the 2013 Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance next month. And your fascinating fact for the day? Well, most people dream about 1 to 2 hours a night, have an average of 4 to 7 dreams each night. Filling in for Nick Tom, Steve Clark, Ave Maria Radio News.
Good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta. When Charles Darwin finished his Origin of Species, he thought he had explained every clue, massive number of details he dealt with. But there's one problem. He thought his theory could explain many things, but he knew that there was at least one significant event in our natural history that his theory didn't explain. And this is the event that is commonly called the Cambrian Explosion. This is a strata where many animals suddenly appear in the fossil record without apparent ancestors in earlier rocks. Well, my guest, Stephen Meyer, has focused on this in his most recent book, Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. Dr. Meyer received his Ph.D. from the University of Cambridge in philosophy of science. He had worked previously as an oil industry geophysicist. Right now he's directing the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute in Seattle. We've talked before. His book, Signature in the Cell, was considered by the London Times Literary Supplement as a book of the year, and he's appeared on many media outlets. And it's great to have you back with me, Stephen. Thanks.
Great to be back with you, Al. I remember our good conversation we had a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing how time goes by, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can remember saying to Nick at that time, I said, we got to get this guy back soon. And here we are 2 years later.
Excellent.
Well, let's talk about this. Just take us back, though, because most of us don't know very much about paleontology or what the natural history of life. So most of us live with cliches. So let's go back. What was Darwin's doubt? What is this problem that you're referring to here? This absence of apparent ancestors. What is the Cambrian?
That's a great place to start. The title of the book, in a sense, explains the project of the book, which is to, first of all, explain what Darwin's doubt was, and then to tell what's become of it. I write the book as a kind of a scientific mystery story, and Darwin did have this one nagging doubt about his own theory, and one that he actually expressed in The Origin of Species itself, and it had to do with, as you say, the explosive or abrupt origin of the first major groups of animals in the fossil record. Darwin thought that the history of life would be best depicted as a kind of tree, where the tree of life represented at the trunk or at the base the first one-celled organism, and all the branches that diverged from that represented the new forms of life that would arise very gradually and slowly over long periods of time, eventually resulting in the branches at the top of the tree that represent all the forms of life that are with us today.
But they all went back to a single common ancestry.
They all went back to a single common ancestry, and all the forms of life that are present today are connected by what he called descent with modification. Now, the other aspect of Darwinian thought was his affirmation of this important mechanism called natural selection, acting on random variations. And Darwin thought that the variations would necessarily have to be very small, very minute, and incremental. If they were very large, they would produce deformed organisms that would die and stop the evolutionary process. So evolution had to work very gradually or not at all, in his view. And that mechanism of natural selection, therefore, required great expanses of time for these gradual transformations to occur. But what we see in the fossil record, in particular in the record documenting the emergence of the first animals, is not a process. There's no documentation of a process that occurs gradually, but instead we see the abrupt origin of these major groups of animals, such as in his day he knew of the trilobites and the brachiopods and some other major groups during this period called the Cambrian period. And so that's what's known as the Cambrian Explosion of animal life. It troubled Darwin, and what I do in the book is tell the story of what's become of that doubt.
So you've got these life forms that emerge in the Cambrian. There's no apparent common ancestry in looking at them. There's just a whole bunch of these things that show up. How complex are they?
Oh, they're exquisitely complex, and not complex just in the sense of a lot of random jumble, but an integrated complexity of the kind that we see in integrated circuits or in complex technological objects where many parts are working in coordination to perform an overall function. And one of my favorites is the trilobite. It's an arthropod with an articulated exoskeleton. The arthropods, I have actually one of a beautiful trilobite fossil on my desk here with that has the eyes of the trilobite very beautifully preserved, and the trilobites have compound eyes, and this particular fossil preserves the little structures that show the compound structure of the eye. So you have this very intricate visual apparatus present in animal life from the very dawn of animal life itself. And so it's just an extraordinary explosion of form and integrated complexity.
So there's no apparent common ancestor then?
Certainly not for the trilobites.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
And here's the big picture on this, is that about 23, the representatives of 23 of the animal phyla are present in the Cambrian period. The phylum is a designation for a a large group in the classification scheme, and usually a phylum represents a unique body plan. So there are 27 phyla that are known from the fossil record. 23 of them are present in the Cambrian, and 20 of those animal phyla first appear in the Cambrian. There are 3 in the late Precambrian, but they also appear abruptly and have no discernible connection to the other 20 that are lacking ancestors. So it's a big jump, and with nothing underneath.
My guest is Dr. Stephen Meyer. He's the author most recently of Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design, taking a look at this phenomenon of what's called the Cambrian Explosion, where many animals suddenly appear in the fossil record without apparent ancestors. This is very early on. What time frame are we looking at here?
530 million years ago for the main pulse of the explosion, and it takes place within a 5 to 10 million year window, which is geologically very sudden, but as I show in the book, it's also biologically very sudden in the sense that the neo-Darwinian mechanism of natural selection acting on random genetic mutations takes a great deal of time to generate even very modest changes, and I provide some mathematical context for that claim in some of the later chapters. There's been some recent work on a problem in genetics that's known as the problem of complex adaptation. And it turns out that even to build new genes and proteins requires many coordinated mutations, and the amount of time that is required for coordinated mutations to occur rises exponentially with each additional necessary mutation. And so there are some basic equations of evolutionary biology in a subdiscipline called population genetics that allows evolutionary biologists to calculate what are called waiting times, how long they should expect to wait for a change of a given complexity to arise. And when you start to calculate the waiting times for even 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, very few numbers of coordinated mutations, you end up generating waiting times that exceed the time that life has existed on Earth for very minimal changes that would be involved in just generating a new gene or protein. And so when you look at the Cambrian explosion, with all of the different anatomical structures and organs and tissues that arise, you're looking at something that would require vastly more time than the fossil record allows, or vastly more time than the entire period of time, the duration that life has existed on Earth. And so though 5 to 10 million years sounds like a lot in relation to a human lifespan, it's very small in relation to the time required for the neo-Darwinian mechanism to generate anything significant.
Mathematicians always have seemed to have some difficulty with Darwinian explanations because, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but we can come back on the other side of the break. But I remember many, many years ago now, when I was still in college, reading of a fellow named Murray Eden at the Wistar Institute, who had published something which just said it doesn't work. So mathematically, this doesn't work. We'll come back on the other side of the break, though, and pick up that conversation.
That's great. He's a great figure in this debate. Yeah.
My guest is Dr. Stephen Meyer, Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life.
In today's economy of buying and selling goods and services, we are all interested in what is best for us and our families. We want the best value for our hard-earned dollar. Hi, I'm Dan Hall from Pinckney Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. And during our summer clearance event, you can surely get the most for your money of any vehicle in the market and be treated with the dignity and respect you deserve. 6 acres loaded with new and certified pre-owned vehicles, great products, great services, great prices. Only at Pinckney Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, or visit us online at pinckneychrysler.com.
This program is brought to you in part by CatholicMatch.com. Marriage and family life is the foundation of society. Catholic Match is doing its part to help build a culture of marriage by providing an online community that acts as a companion for singles as they grow in their faith while discerning God's will. CatholicMatch.com. Faith-focused dating for today's single Catholics. More information available at CatholicMatch.com/Ave Maria.
Wine guards, everything from lawn to snow.
When
When you want something done right, you go to the experts. With power equipment, you want to go to the guys who know what they're talking about, not the ones wearing the aprons. The experts at Weingart's have you covered from sales to service with people that will help you pick the right equipment for the job and maintain it. Whether you're looking for mowers, tractors, chainsaws, blowers, or generators, Weingart's has a great selection to choose from. Their massive inventory includes all the top quality brands you know and some that you don't. And Weingart's provides world-class service and parts support to keep your equipment running at its best. From at-home delivery and demonstration to our 7-year enhanced protection plan, Weingart's delivers the kind of service you can't get anywhere else. When you're ready to talk to a real expert, stop by our locations in Utica, Farmington Hills, Cedar Springs, Clarkston, and our newest location in Ann Arbor.
Weingart's, everything from lawn to snow.
Ann Arbor Smiles is a state-of-the-art dental practice led by the talents of doctors Dan Kennedy, Chris Marzoni, and Stephen Gray. One of their many satisfied patients is Debbie Herbeck, the wife of Fire on the Earth host Peter Herbeck.
For the past 25 years, our family has been going to Drs. Kennedy and Marzoni, and we've been receiving quality dental care. And one of the things we love about going there, besides all the friendly faces, is that the dentists really do know us, and they're really there to serve the needs of our family.
Go to AnnArborSmiles.com today.
In 2008, Crystal Dixon, who at the time was Associate Vice President for Human Resources at the University of Toledo, was home on a Sunday morning thumbing through the Toledo Free Press when she read an editorial entitled Gay Rights and Wrongs. In this opinion piece, Michael Miller, the editor-in-chief of the paper, equated the so-called struggles of those in the gay rights movement with the struggles of African-American civil rights victims. Ms. Dixon, an African-American and devout Christian, disagreed with the author, so she sat down at her home computer and drafted a response. Her op-ed was published a few weeks later. In May of 2008, Ms. Dixon received a letter from the president of the university stating that effective immediately her employment was terminated because of the public position she had taken in the Toledo Free Press. Yes, Ms. Dixon was fired by her government employer for publicly expressing her Christian views, and her firing was upheld by a federal appellate court which concluded that, on balance, the university's diversity interests outweighed Ms. Dixon's First Amendment right to freedom of speech. As a result, the American Freedom Law Center filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court requesting that the court review and reverse this outrageous decision which allowed political correctness to trump the First Amendment. I'm Robert Muse, co-founder and senior counsel for the American Freedom Law Center, bringing you this Faith and Freedom Minute. You can learn more about the American Freedom Law Center and its fight for your faith and freedom at www.americanfreedomlawcenter.org.
I'm Al Kresta. With me, Dr. Stephen Meyer. Darwin's Doubt, the explosive origin of animal life and the case for intelligent design. We're taking a look at what is commonly called the Cambrian Explosion, which roughly 530 million years ago in the strata called Cambrian. And there's this activity of 5 to 10 million years in which 23 of the phyla of animals, 23 of the 27 that exist now, show up in the fossil record there without any apparent common ancestor. They just pop up. And they're of significant complexity. I mean, we were talking about that earlier. And before the break, I mentioned, or Stephen was actually describing that this 5 to 10 million year period sounds like a long time in relationship to human lifespan, but once you begin to look at the time required for complex adaptation of these organisms, it's not very long at all. Mathematicians look at it and they say, well, I don't even know, a lot of times, if there's enough time in the purported history of the Earth for some of these changes to take place. But then I said, mathematicians seem to always have had some kind of problem with Darwinian explanation. I referred to Murray Eden in the Wistar Institute, which I came across when I was an undergraduate many years ago. So what about mathematicians and Darwin?
Well, that's a great and perceptive question. There's a chapter in the book about Murray Eden and some of the questions that he raised with a number of other MIT mathematicians, physicists, computer engineers, and scientists who convened a conference in 1966 called the Wistar Institute Conference. It was held in Philadelphia with many leading evolutionary biologists in attendance, as well as these scientists with a quantitative dimension to their expertise. And basically, the mathematically inclined scientists were challenging the Darwinian biologists to put numbers on their scenarios and to demonstrate that the scenarios were plausible in light of the immense improbability of generating even new genes and proteins in the time available. And you have to remember that in the mid-60s, science was just kind of coming out of what's called the molecular biological revolution, and that was the period of time in which there was this extraordinary explosion of understanding about DNA and proteins, and particularly about how DNA encodes digital information, or information in a typographic form, as some of the scientists at Wistar referred to it. And as they started thinking about this mathematically and started thinking about the probabilities involved, they realized that the mathematicians realized that the probabilities weren't good. I've got a simple illustration that gets that across. Imagine you got a bike lock, and most bike locks have 3 or 4 dials. But imagine you have a bike lock with 10 dials and 10 digits on each dial. Now you've got 10 times 10 times 10 to the 10th power possible ways of arranging those different numbers on the bike lock. That's 10 billion different possibilities. If you're a thief and you're wanting to crack the bike lock by trial and error, and you know the security guard is making his rounds every 3 or 4 minutes, question, do you have enough time to make a search of those possibilities such that it's more likely than not that you will succeed? And the answer to that question is obviously no. You're going to maybe, in 3 or 4 minutes you might generate 40 or 50 different combinations, but that's a very small percentage of the total number of combinations that you would have to sample. This is the mathematical problem that the people from MIT first posed to their biology colleagues, and that is the problem of what's called combinatorial inflation. There's so many different ways of arranging the possible the characters in the genetic message, the A's, C's, G's, and T's that are part of the DNA message. They represent what are called the bases, and the bases in DNA function like alphabetic characters. But there's so many ways of arranging those characters that do not produce functional genes and proteins in comparison to the few that do, that any random search using mutation is essentially in the same position as that bike thief. There's not enough time in the known history of life on Earth to search the possibilities, to search but a very small fraction of the possibilities necessary to generate even a single new gene or protein. And so the idea that random genetic mutation could generate the new information that's necessary to build a Cambrian animal is just implausible in the extreme. And I have a couple of chapters on that problem in the book.
So when we say, this is kind of funny, because I'm trying to think in popular conversation, when people say, well, yes, this is improbable, but if you give it enough time, you'll get there. That seems to imply that there's something directional about randomness or about time, as though there's a little bit of, if you give it enough time, there's progress being made all the time. You just have to give it enough time. But there's no progress necessarily being made.
There's no progress. I use another illustration of a man blindfolded, and he's dropped into a shark-free pool. Well, it's good that there are no sharks, but the pool is the size of the universe, and he's blindfolded, so he's going to wander around aimlessly, never making any directional progress towards the one ladder that's at the edge of the pool.
Right. Right.
And but the other problem is there's a fallacy in all of this kind of. You often hear that. Well, you mean there's a chance? There's a tiny, tiny, tiny chance that you would find the protein. But this is I sometimes call it the Jim Carrey fallacy from the little scene in the movie where Jim Carrey, the goofy comic, comes up to a beautiful girl and he says, "What are the odds that a girl like me and a guy like you," of course he bungles the pickup line, "could get together?" And she looks at him and sees that he's a geek, and she says, "Not good." And he says, "Well, what do you mean not good?" like 1 in a 100, and she says no, more like 1 in a million. And then he starts jumping around all excited, and he says, oh, you mean there's a chance? And what she means is there's no chance, buddy. But from a scientific point of view, when you're evaluating the chance hypothesis, what you want to know is whether the probability of the event occurring is more likely than not to occur by chance or less likely than not. And in the case when it's vastly less likely than not that it would occur by chance, then you reject the chance hypothesis in support of something better. Because what you're looking for in science is you want to make an inference to the best explanation, not to the least plausible explanation. Yeah. And so when people want to rely on random mutation and natural selection to generate genetic information, they're relying on the least plausible explanation. There are much better explanations, and that's what I address in the book.
Well, let's go to that, because and you're more aware of this than I am. If you have a better explanation, right, then why have so many brilliant scientists missed it?
Well, in part they've missed it because they're operating under a kind of community-wide imposed convention that says that scientists, to be scientists, must limit themselves to strictly materialistic explanations of all phenomena, all events, all kinds of events. Mm-hmm. And there was a review of Darwin's Doubt, my new book, in the New Yorker last week. And there were a number of, the review was critical, but there were a number of oddly backhanded compliments to the book. Mm-hmm. They said it was serious and reasonable and conversant with all the relevant science. Yeah. But nevertheless, it was a masterwork of pseudoscience. And I was actually flattered by that because the compliment,
but most of us don't get a masterwork of anything.
A masterwork. Well, it was not so much that; it was that the review. I was encouraged. Let's say that because the review that phrase went right to the heart of the issue. Why is a book arguing for intelligent design a work of pseudoscience? Because the author of the review was operating under the same convention that many scientists themselves operate under, and that is this convention of methodological naturalism, which says that that scientists have to limit themselves to strictly materialistic explanations. But there are some kinds of phenomena that we know are not well explained by material explanations, and the most important kind of event or phenomenon that isn't explained well by a materialistic explanation is the phenomenon of information. Mm-hmm. If you go into the British Museum and look at the Rosetta Stone and say, well, isn't this wonderful, what wind and erosion produced, people will look at you as if you're a little crazy, because what we know from experience, from our uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning, is that information, in particular the kind of informative, and the Rosetta Stone is loaded with information, that information always arises from an intelligent source. It does not arise from undirected material processes. And yet the convention of methodological naturalism or materialism says you have to, as a scientist, limit yourself to explaining everything by reference to strictly material processes. Well, I think that's an irrational convention when you encounter an information-rich system, again, because of what we know from cause and effect about what it takes to build information-rich systems. And as I argue in the book, the key thing that needs to be explained in an event like the Cambrian Explosion is the origin of the reams of information that have to be present to build those complex animals.
Why is that such a difficult question to understand? I understand the answer might be difficult, but it seems to me to ask that question, what is the origin of the intelligent information we've got there? Why is that considered outside?
Well, I think it's a worldview sensitive issue, and if you affirm intelligent design, you are affirming an idea which has clearly theistic implications. If you challenge neo-Darwinism, you're challenging an idea that has materialistic implications.
Right.
Materialistic implications in the philosophical sense. Now, I'm not saying that all scientists are so hidebound in their metaphysical prejudices that they can't consider an alternative point of view. But what I am saying is that many scientists equate their own understanding of biological origins with science itself, not realizing that what they really are bringing to the table is a philosophical prejudice of their own. And they can't get out of that way of thinking well enough to see that there might be an evidential case, a scientific case, for intelligent design, a view that challenges their very staunchly held Darwinian convictions.
Stephen, hold it there. We'll come back and continue conversation looking at Darwin's doubt. Stephen Meyer's new book. It's, again, subtitled Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. I'm Al Kresta. More coming up.
In the Gospels, Jesus is asked a question about paying taxes. His response includes the famous statement, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." The Catechism uses this proclamation in two ways. In 2242, it reminds us that there is a distinction between serving God and serving a political community. We need to have a conscience that is well formed in the faith to help us discern when these two are in opposition and to know the appropriate response. The Catechism also references Jesus' statement in regards to his supreme lordship in paragraph 450. Several of Paul's letters describe our Lord Jesus as ruling over all people, all spirits, and all creation which is held together by him. Thus all earthly leaders must one day bend their knees before him. Let us pray that in our lives we may let Jesus, our Lord, guide our conscience and help us to remain faithful to his rule. This message is brought to you by the Catholic Biblical School of Michigan, www.cbsmich.org.
Whatever happened to great luxury cars? When did they become so predictable? When did they all start to look the same? At Ceci Lincoln, Mazda, and Volvo, we've looked around the world and here at home to bring something different to today's luxury car market. Lincoln, the brand that has always represented the height of American elegance, design, and quality. Mazda, a line offering the best combination of features and value to the American driver, and a certain excitement that the old standbys like Honda and Toyota just don't offer anymore. And Volvo, a world-class European brand that rivals the quality of BMW and Mercedes, but represents something very different and beautiful on the new American road. Ceci Lincoln, Volvo, and Mazda, proudly serving Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti since 1946. 3990 Jackson Road, Ann Arbor. Be original.
Kresta in the Afternoon is brought to you in part by CatholicBusinessPages.com, your national and local online business directory, connecting Christian business professionals with Catholic consumers. Advertisers have taken a stand to support Christian family values in the marketplace. It's important to support businesses that embrace life and promote the gospel of Christ. And at CatholicBusinessPages.com, business professionals have taken that stand. CatholicBusinessPages.com, a great place to get connected.
Faith, family, and the culture of life. It's Family Man with Catholic therapist Dr. Gregory Popchak.
Is television good for babies? A new study suggests that many parents seem to think so. Researchers at the University of Washington found that 40% of 3-month-olds and 90% of 2-year-olds are already regular TV viewers. 3-month-olds watch about an hour of television a day, and 2-year-olds watch about 2 hours. Many people think that parents use television as a babysitter, but this was actually the third in a list of reasons given by parents in the survey. 29% of parents said they thought television was good for their babies' brains. 23% said the children found it relaxing. Only 21% admit to using television as a babysitter. Parents who think that TV is good for babies' brains are kidding themselves. Previous studies show television watching is associated with higher risk of attention deficit disorder, more aggressive behavior, and later, poorer school performance. One study found that normal children's aggression decreased 25% within 1 week of eliminating television from their diets. In small doses, TV can be a useful tool, but whatever else it isn't good for babies' brains. Better to turn off the tube and play with your child. I'm Dr. Gregory Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
You've been listening to Family Man with Catholic therapist Dr. Gregory Popchak. To discover more resources for living an abundant life, including books, CDs, and Catholic counseling services, visit us online at exceptionalmarriages.com.
And good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta with Dr. Stephen Meyer, author, most recently, of Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. Looking at the Cambrian Explosion, this is that event 530 million years ago, occurs over a period of 5 to 10 million years, in which most of the animal phyla that we are aware of today came into existence without any apparent common ancestor, which of course is a direct challenge to the reigning Darwinian and neo-Darwinian view of things. I want to come back to this question about the difficulty that many scientists have in considering the question of intelligent design. I do agree that it's certainly more compatible with the theistic view of things, I can imagine somebody saying not necessarily. I mean, I can imagine somebody saying, look, really, we're not talking about the nature of God here. We're talking about the nature of matter. That somehow it is that matter has embedded within it some kind of code, some kind of intelligence, and that's what does it. So I don't necessarily have to believe in a theistic conception of God. I've got maybe matter itself is impregnated with some kind of intelligent code, and it's just always been that way.
Yeah, there certainly is information, code embedded in matter, but I think that what that position does is it conflates cause and effect.
Okay.
And again, scientifically, the guiding principle is that our uniform and repeated experience of cause and effect should guide our reconstructions of what caused events to happen in the past. And using that principle, with a very principle of reasoning, by the way, that Darwin himself used, sometimes called classically the vera causa principle, looking for a true cause or a cause which is known to be sufficient to produce the effect in question. What we know from experience is that when we see matter, when we see information embedded in matter, there is a separable and prior intelligent cause responsible for that. Look at a computer program. Computer programs aren't themselves intelligent, but they produce effects, or they embed information, which is the effect of intelligence. It was produced by an intelligent cause. So I think it's a more rational position to infer a cause which is separate from the effect, rather than trying to imbue brute matter with sentience or conscious intelligence. I think that's a kind of mysticism, which there are some. I address that in the book. There are some self-organizational theorists that are coming very close to saying something like that. I think Morgan Freeman had an interview about science and religion just recently, in which he said something very similar to that, and also rejected intelligent design in the process. But I think that intelligent design is more rational and scientific in the sense that it is based on our knowledge of cause and effect, and therefore doesn't impute to matter an attribute that we actually don't see at work, which is sentience or consciousness.
Well, let me continue on this a little bit, because I agree, and I could hear this person saying, well, I agree, this comports best with our lived experience. But if we're talking about ultimate things, we're talking about some things which are sui generis. They are to themselves alone. Christians believe that God is distinct from his creation in some way, and so we have this theory of self-organizational matter, and so we believe that the very beginning of things is sui generis. It doesn't. You can't really use our common experience to. Our common experience is limited. This is prior to all of our experience, and it's in a category by itself. The same way you Christians believe God is in a category by himself.
Well, again, I think that if a person wants to affirm that,
I mean, a pantheist has to do something like that, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the third way in this discussion between materialism and theism is pantheism, of course, and pantheists might want to say something like that, and there are people who would say something like that. But the key thing to point out then is that position is a position that's held apart from any reasoned basis. When you say I'm going to say that our ordinary experience, our scientific experience, shouldn't inform our ideas about what the most likely account of origins is, then I think a person is free to do that, but they're doing that as an irrational leap or at least irrational leap, one that does not attempt to justify the belief system by reference to any point of view or any scientific or ordinary experience. I think the appeal of the intelligent design argument is that it does justify itself. It does provide evidence from our both ordinary and scientific experience, and so there is a convergence of reason and faith, if you will, or reason and the theory. And I think the theory of intelligent design has larger theistic implications, and so what I think you see in that discussion is a convergence of faith and reason, which is, I think, all to be preferred, because in every other domain of life, we use reason as a guide, and I don't see a good reason for suspending reason when we're looking at ultimate questions.
No, I certainly buy that, and I believe that's true. It'd be awfully difficult, it seems to me, to have that kind of argument and maintain any continuity with ultimate questions of origin and destiny.
Well, and if you have a person who says, well, I'm going to believe something in spite of what I know to be true from my ordinary experience and from scientific investigation, you can't really have an argument with a person on that grounds. At that point, you just have to say, well, you're free to choose that point of view if you like, but you can't claim that it's the more reasonable point of view.
Right.
And that's where the debate starts. I mean, the intelligent design is rejected primarily by people who say it's not scientific,
right?
And that gets back to our earlier discussion about the arbitrary way in which they're defining science.
So let's come back to the rules of science then, because you have a chapter on it in the book, and this is always again, who defines what science is? There's a lot. You're a doctorate in philosophy of science, so you know there's all these arguments about the limitations of science and exactly what counts for science, what features are what are the features of the scientific method. Who determines that? How? I mean, I imagine you'd say, well, kind of the majority of scientists determine that.
Well, but there is no body that casts a vote and decides. We don't have electoral commissions, and neither is there, an authoritative catechism of science. These are judgments that individual scientists make. The convention of methodological naturalism or materialism grew up in the wake of the Darwinian Revolution in the late 19th century, and it's become conventional. But what I argue in the book, and other advocates of intelligent design argue, is that the fundamental obligation of the scientist, the spirit of science itself, is to follow the evidence where it leads. And where the evidence about origins leads, I think, is to intelligent design, precisely because of what we know about the importance of information to living systems, the importance of circuitry to living systems, and what we know about what it takes to build features like that from our own experience of cause and effect. So I think if the motto is follow the evidence where it leads, I think then science leads to intelligent design. If the convention is you must limit yourself to strictly materialistic explanations, regardless of what the evidence says or points to, well, then you will be stuck in a materialistic framework, and something like neo-Darwinism or some other materialistic evolutionary theory will reign. But that doesn't mean that it's truly the best explanation. It just means that it's the best explanation in the setting of among an artificially limited group of options.
Yeah.
But I think it's
this is the best
naturalist approach.
This is the best that naturalists can come up with.
This is the best that naturalists can come up with. But I think that that limits the evolutionary biology or historical biology unnecessarily, and in a sense in an irrational way, because it limits the intellectual freedom of the scientists to follow the evidence to the explanation that best comports with our knowledge of cause and effect.
So what do they do with the Cambrian explosion? It must make people uncomfortable. It made Darwin uncomfortable. I imagine people are still uncomfortable.
That's a perceptive question, too, because what I do in the book is first look at the mystery of the missing fossils and show that has been made more acute. Then I look at the mystery of the origin of information and the other things that are needed to build animals, and show that has made the problem of the Cambrian more acute, and specifically more acute for the standard textbook theory of evolution known as neo-Darwinism. Then I have a third chapter, or the third section of the book, which looks at the post-Darwinian or post-neo-Darwinian theories of evolution that are being formulated. And those theories are important not because they actually solve the problem of the Cambrian explosion. They don't. They end up invariably coming up to this same problem of the origin of genetic and other forms of information, and either fail to solve that problem, or they end up presupposing the existence of prior sources of information in order to conceal the problem. But those chapters are primarily important because they show, or those theories are important because they show that the standard textbook theory really is in deep trouble. The neo-Darwinism has reached a point of impasse. It's in a crisis, and the way you know that is that evolutionary biologists themselves are furiously attempting to formulate new theories and to formulate new mechanisms that would have creative power that the natural selection random mutation mechanism doesn't have.
And they're writing on this too. My mind I can't remember the two authors recently wrote something about I don't know what Darwin didn't know or what's wrong with Darwinian evolution. And then there's the philosopher Thomas Nagel, who doesn't seem to buy the standard.
Nagel's book has been extremely influential. His Mind and Cosmos, the subtitle is incredible. He says, why the neo-Darwinian materialist view of reality is almost certainly false. And that you couldn't be more blatant.
He's not a theist
He's a philosopher
either,
of science, so people try to dismiss him. But what I show in the book is that there are at least six different new schools of evolutionary thought, evolutionary theories that have been developed to try to address the problems that neo-Darwinism doesn't. There was a group of scientists that met in Altenburg in Europe a number of years ago, not that many years ago, called the Altenburg 16, and they were exploring they were calling for a new theory of evolution and exploring different possibilities. So the field is in a great state of flux. It's an extremely dynamic debate, and into that context, I propose the theory of intelligent design and develop the case for it using, again, the same standard method of historical scientific reasoning that Charles Darwin himself used.
Now, Stephen, how do you think it's going with the intelligent design movement? I'm talking about in terms of public relations. There were some problems a few years ago.
We had that Dover case.
The Dover case, right?
And when I say we, I don't mean that we were proposing what the people, the well-meaning people of Dover, Pennsylvania, were proposing. I think those folks were mostly young Earth creationists who were using intelligent design as a way of trying to get their ideas into this classroom.
Got about 15 seconds, Stephen.
Yeah. I think overall the ID movement is going gangbusters.
Oh, good.
The book just made the New York Times bestseller list, but more importantly, there's a huge international network of scientists, a new journal, prestigious editorial board in support of the intelligent design concept.
Beautiful.
And I think it's got a bright future.
Stephen, thanks so much. Always good talking with you.
Wonderful to to be on the air with you, Al, and your perceptive questions. I enjoy them.
In today's economy of buying and selling goods and services, we are all interested in what is best for us and our families. We want the best value for our hard-earned dollar. Hi, I'm Dan Hall from Pinckney Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, and during our summer clearance event, you can surely get the most for your money of any vehicle in the market and be treated with the dignity and respect you deserve. 6 acres loaded with new and certified pre-owned vehicles, great products, great services, great prices. Only at Pinckney Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, or visit us online at pinckneychrysler.com.
Ever thought you'd make a bundle by trading in or selling your used vehicle only to find out it's worth a dinner for two? Well, it's much more valuable to donate your vehicle to Ave Maria Radio. Thousands of Americans donate their vehicle each year. The donation to Ave Maria is easy, tax-deductible, and supports our efforts to evangelize. A year from now, will you remember that dinner or your gracious and selfless donation? Go to AveMariaRadio.net to find out more. That's AveMariaRadio.net.
Hi, this is Father John Riccardo, inviting you to join me as we explore some of the deepest questions that arise in our hearts, questions that shape the way we think, the way we speak, and the way we live. For all of these questions, Christ is the answer.
We're in the time of year when many couples marry, and that's what Father Riccardo talks about this week. The topics include relationships, prayers, scripture, love, our personal wills, and what our Lord wants for us and our families. It's Can We Trust the Biblical Vision of Marriage? Listen to Christ is the Answer Wednesday evenings at 8, Saturday afternoons at 5, and Sunday mornings at 11 on 990 WDEL, 1440 WMAX, and AveMariaRadio.net on the Internet.
Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the image of the invisible God. He points us to our destiny. He reveals the dignity of the human person. He is the one who makes known the Father. Christ is the answer.
Good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta. You know, it's one wonderful thing about looking over intellectual history is that you do see that there are fads. In other words, there are trends. There are things that are popular for a period of time, and then they run out of steam, and something else comes up. Now, that's not to say that there's not objective truth out there. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that the human capacity to interpret what's out there changes quite a bit. And it may well be, I'm not entirely convinced at this point, but it may well be that we're nearing a paradigm shift when it comes to natural history. It's you wouldn't know it by reading a lot of the skeptic magazines, but you find elite members of the philosophy science world, and also certain zoologists and professors of genetics, statistical people who work on engineering, who apply statistics to the Darwinian model. They're not impressed. In fact, they're calling for something new. And as Stephen said, there are about 6 new schools that are trying to grapple with a form of evolution which is not only naturalistic or materialistic. We'll see what happens. Darwin's Doubt. Stephen Meyer is the author. The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. I'm Al Kresta. See you soon.
Would you like a copy of this program? If you miss a part of this program or want to hear it again, Ave Maria programming can be made yours when you order. Just call 734-930-4506. Within a few weeks, you'll receive a copy of this show and any others you want to order on CD. Call 734-930-4506.
Kresta in the Afternoon is brought to you in part by CatholicBusinessPages.com, your national and local online business directory, connecting Christian business professionals with Catholic consumers. Advertisers have taken a stand to support Christian family values in the marketplace. It's important to support businesses that embrace life and promote the gospel of Christ. And at CatholicBusinessPages.com, business professionals have taken that stand. CatholicBusinessPages.com, a great place to get connected.
Fully Alive. Reflections on the scripture readings of today's Mass with Father Pat Egan, chaplain of Ave Maria Radio.
The picture of gentle Jesus, meek and mild, is very misleading. He was a zealous prophet, passionate for truth, a reformer, a founder of a school of disciples who he called to become martyrs. He was a strong man, completely focused on his mission, confronting head-on the religious powers of his day, like so many prophets before him had done. He wouldn't compromise, and he didn't compromise, at the cost of his life. And he warned his followers to expect trouble and lots of it. So why on earth should we follow him? because, as the Gospel says, he has the words of eternal life. I don't think that I've come to bring peace on earth.